The Valkyrie Conclave had a word for humanity, used in private and in diplomatic correspondence, marked for internal circulation only, a word that translated most accurately as charmingly insufficient. Not stupid, not weak, not threatening, charmingly insufficient, in the way that a child's drawing of a spaceship is charming, sincere and energetic, and entirely disconnected from the actual engineering involved. They had used this word for 63 years, since humanity's first faster-than-light contact with the broader galactic community, and in 63 years, nothing had given the Conclave reason to revise the assessment. Humans were enthusiastic. Humans were curious. Humans made friends easily, formed alliances with improbable speed, and brought an energy to galactic diplomacy that more established civilizations found alternately refreshing and exhausting. But primitive was the correct word, technically. By the standard metrics, the Conclave applied to civilizational development. Single-origin species, younger than most assembly members by thousands of years, with a technological base that put them comfortably in the lower third of galactic capability rankings. The one area where the standard metrics had produced a slightly anomalous reading was archaeology. Human archaeological capability was, by every measure the Conclave had applied, extraordinary. Not for a young species. Extraordinary, by any standard. The ability to locate, identify, excavate, preserve, and analyze ancient artifacts and sites at a depth and precision that the Conclave's own specialists could not match, and had spent considerable time trying to understand. They had concluded, eventually, that it was a cultural artifact of the human's specific developmental path. A species that had only recently reached the stars, but had been studying its own ancient history intensively. For millennia had simply gotten very good at it. The Conclave had noted this capability in their assessments, and filed it under interesting but not strategically relevant, and moved on to more pressing matters. They should not have moved on. Smash the like button right now if you already know that 63 years of calling humanity charmingly insufficient is about to cost the Valkyrie Conclave more than they can afford. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video, and share this with every science fiction fan you know, because the Relic Hunters are about to open something the galaxy has been afraid of for 1,000 years. The Relic Hunters Guild was not an official body. It had no government charter, no assembly recognition, no formal standing in any diplomatic or legal framework that the galactic community acknowledged. It was a professional association of approximately 4,000 humans who made their living doing what humans had always done with the past. They hung it up, figuring out what it meant, and sharing what they found with everyone who was interested, which was generally everyone. The Guild had been founded 31 years into humanity's galactic contact period by a group of archaeologists and historians, and what the Guild's founding documents called acquisition specialists, a term that's covered a range of professional approaches to ancient material culture that not everyone in the galactic community would have classified as strictly legal. The acquisition specialists were, in the plainest terms, the best thieves in the galaxy, not thieves of contemporary property. Thieves of the past. People who had spent their careers getting into places that were locked and getting out with things that had been put, thereby people who had been dead for a very long time. The Conclave found this aspect of the Guild distasteful. The Assembly's cultural heritage frameworks were extensive and well established, and the Guild's acquisition specialists operated in a relationship with those frameworks that was, at best, creative. But the Guild also found things that nobody else found. Located sites that nobody else located. Identified artifacts that nobody else could identify, and shared their findings with the Assembly's academic community with a generosity that made it difficult to maintain a sustained institutional objection to their methods. The Guild's current director was a woman named Director Kale Oren, 57 years old, 34 years in the field. Built like someone who had spent those 34 years climbing into places that were not designed to be climbed into, which she had, and possessed of a reputation in galactic archaeological circles that was simultaneously the highest and the most complicated of anyone in the field. She had found 7 major sites in her career that had been classified as undiscoverable by the Assembly's formal survey programs. She had recovered 32 artifact classes that the Conclave's own specialists had declared irretrievable. She had been banned from 4-star systems for methods that the banning authorities described as reckless and that Kale described as effective. She was sitting in the Guild's headquarters station, a converted or processing platform in the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars, reviewing the survey data for what her senior analyst had flagged as a significant anomaly. When the Valtheri Conclave's ambassador made the call that started everything. Like and subscribe right now, because Kailaron is exactly the kind of human that the galaxy did not prepare itself for. Hit the share button to get this story to more people. And stay with us, because the ambassador's call is not what anyone expects. Ambassador Velsan of the Valthari Conclave was not the type of diplomat who made calls to the directors of unofficial professional associations. He was the type of diplomat who communicated through formal channels with credentialed counterparts, following protocols that have been established over centuries of galactic diplomatic practice. He made this call himself, not through a diplomatic aide, not through a formal channel, directly, on a line that was not supposed to be accessible to private sector contacts, which told Kale something about the quality of what he wanted before he said a word. He said, "Director Oren, I am told you are the most capable artifact recovery specialist in human space. Possibly the most capable in the Assembly," she said. "I've heard similar things. What do you need?" he said. "I need something recovered, something that the Conclave has been unable to recover through its own means for the past 12 years. Something that requires capabilities that our specialists have concluded are currently beyond our reach," she said. "What is it?" He paused. The pause was short, but it was real. The kind of pause that comes before someone says something they have been deciding whether to say. Then he said, "Are you familiar with the Velpreth precursors?" The Velpreth precursors were the oldest known civilization in the galactic record, predating every current Assembly member by between 400 and 800 million years, depending on which of their sites you were dating. They had not simply died. They had not been destroyed or absorbed or gradually dwindled. They had, by the evidence of every site ever found, simply stopped. Every site was abandoned in the same condition. Nothing destroyed. Nothing taken. Every artifact in place. Every system inactive. As if an entire civilization spanning several thousand star systems had simultaneously decided to leave, leaving everything behind in perfect condition, and gone somewhere that no subsequent archaeological investigation had ever been able to identify. The artifacts they had left behind were, without exception, the most sophisticated and least understood objects ever recovered from any site in galactic history. The Assembly's Archaeological Commission had classified the entire Precasa material record as Tier 1, restricted after a series of incidents involving recovered artifacts that had demonstrated capabilities that the Commission's Safety Board described in the internal documentation as deeply concerning. Not dangerous in any documented case. Deeply concerning because the capabilities were not understood, and capabilities that were not understood could not be assessed for safety, and the Commission's policy on unaccessible capabilities was conservative. There were 17 known Velpreth sites. All of them had been surveyed. 12 of them had been carefully, conservatively excavated by the Commission's own teams. The artifacts recovered from those 12 sites occupied a secure facility in the outer Assembly administrative complex and had not been touched by anyone's instruments in 4 years. The other 5 sites were known to exist, but had not been accessed, because the Commission's surveys had identified access challenges that their teams could not resolve with available methods. One of those 5 sites had, 12 years ago, been identified as likely containing a category of artifact that the Commission's own theoretical model suggested was of extraordinary significance. The kind of significance that justified the 12 years of failed recovery attempts, none of which the Conclave had been willing to make public. Kale said, "I know the precursors. I know the Tier 1 classification. I know the 5 inaccessible sites. You were talking about Site 17, Ambassador Velsan said. "Yes," she said. "The one with the access anomaly that no survey team has been able to characterize." He said, "Yes," she said. "The one the Commission's Safety Board has been arguing about for 12 years, because they can't agree on what's in there or whether getting it out is a good idea," he said. "Our theoretical models suggest it is the most important thing we have ever been unable to reach, and I am told that if anyone can reach it, you can," she said. "I can probably reach it. The question you should be asking is whether you're prepared for what I find when I do," he said. "That is exactly the question I've been asking for 12 years. I have not found a satisfactory answer. I am calling you because I have concluded that not reaching it is worse than reaching it without a satisfactory answer. She said, "Tell me everything you have on the access anomaly, and I mean everything. Not the public summary, the full, classified survey data." He said, "I will send it within the hour." She said, "Then I'll start putting a team together. Subscribe to the channel right now because Kayla Oren just agreed to go get the most important unreachable thing in galactic history. Like this video so more people can find this story and share it because the team she's about to assemble is unlike anything the Conclave has ever seen." The team Kale assembled in the following 10 days was 6 people, which was smaller than any team the Commission had sent, and which he chose specifically because small teams moved faster, made decisions faster, and were harder for the Access Anomaly's defensive systems to track if the anomaly turned out to be what she suspected it was. She suspected it was an active system, not a passive geological challenge, not a structural problem with the site's physical access points. An active system running for 400 million years, designed to prevent unauthorized access by beings whose authorization could not be verified against whatever authorization framework the precursors had built. The survey data supported this. The access anomaly behaved differently with different teams. It responded to the composition of the survey party, to the equipment they brought, to the approaches they tried. Active systems did that. Passive obstacles did not. Active systems that had been running for 400 million years, maintaining their function through whatever power source the precursors had built to last that long. Capable of preventing access by the most sophisticated archaeological teams in the assembly, were not a passive challenge to be overcome by better equipment. They were a puzzle. They were a test. And the question that Kale had been turning over since the moment Velsan had finished explaining the access anomaly was, what is this system testing for? Her team, her senior analyst, a man named Dr. Rio Vasil, who had been working with her for 12 years, and whose ability to read ancient system logic was the best she had encountered. An acquisition specialist named Mira Solis, who had gotten into 7 Tier 2 restricted sites without triggering any of their access controls, and who was the quietest person Kale had ever worked with. To field archaeologists, whose combined experience in precursor sites specifically was greater than any other 2-person team in the guild. A physicist named Dr. Ashachun, who had spent 15 years studying precursor energy systems, and one person who was not a guild member at all. The 7th team member was a 12-year-old girl named Sale, the daughter of one of the field archaeologists, who had been accompanying her father on low-risk survey work since she was 8 and who had, 2 months ago, published a paper on precursor symbolic language that the Assembly's precursor specialist community had spent 3 weeks arguing about before concluding that she was correct. The paper had identified a pattern in the symbolic records at multiple precursor sites that every previous researcher had classified as decorative or structural, and that Sale had identified as a communication system. Specifically, a communication system that was not designed to convey information from the precursors to future visitors, but to assess the cognitive and emotional characteristics of future visitors who encountered it. It was a test. It had always been a test. Every precursor site that had ever been excavated had been running the same ongoing assessment of the minds that entered it, and nobody had known. And the assessment had been generating responses for 400 million years and filing them in a record that nobody had ever accessed. Sale had identified the symbolic language. She had not yet been able to read what it was assessing for. That was the piece she had been working on for 2 months, when her father told her about Site 17 and she had asked to come. Kale had said yes. The Conclave's ambassador had said no. Kale had sighed. The access anomaly is a test. My 12-year-old team member has identified what it's testing for. If you want this done, she comes. The ambassador had said yes, with visible reluctance that he did not bother to fully conceal, because the alternative was 12 more years of failure. Hit like right now, if a 12-year-old publishing papers on precursor symbolic language is the most HFY development in this story so far. Subscribe to the channel, share this video everywhere, and stay with us because Site 17 is about to be reached and what is inside it is going to answer questions the galaxy has had for 400 million years. The journey to Site 17 took 11 days. The site was in a star system that the precursors had abandoned along with everything else, a system that now contained a single cold red dwarf, orbited by 4 rocky planets, all of them geologically inactive, all of them surface preserved in the specific way that dead worlds preserve themselves when nothing disturbed them across geological time. The site was on the third planet, not on the surface. Under it, deep under it, in a facility that the Commission's ground-penetrating surveys had mapped to a depth of 3 kilometers, beneath a plateau in the planet's southern hemisphere. The access anomaly began, as it always did with survey teams, before they reached the surface. The team's instruments started behaving in ways that instruments should not behave when they were still 400 kilometers above the planet and descending, not malfunctioning. Responding. The instruments were showing readings that corresponded to genuine physical phenomena, but the phenomena were not what the instruments should have been detecting at this altitude, this trajectory, this approach vector. Dr. Chun, reviewing the instrument feeds in real time, said, "The facility is scanning us, not the planet's geology. The facility. It's running a deep scan of our vessel and everyone aboard, and the scan is generating a response in the site's external infrastructure." Kale said, "What kind of response?" Chun said, "The access anomaly readings are changing. They changed when we entered the system. They changed again when we began our descent. They are changing right now in a pattern that is not consistent with any previous survey team's approach data." Sale, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the vessel's observation section with the symbolic language notation she had been working on spread across her tablet, looked up and said, "It's recognizing something." Kale said, "What?" Sale said, "I don't know yet, but the symbolic response pattern in the external infrastructure matches the assessment category that I identified in my paper, the one I called cognitive signature verification. It's checking whether we have something it's looking for," Kale said. "And do we?" Sale said. "I think so. I think that's why the readings are changing. I think some of us do." The descent continued. The access anomaly did not prevent their approach. This alone was significant. 12 previous survey teams had been prevented from surface contact. The team's vessel touched down on the plateau without any interference, which the field archaeologists were noting in their logs, with the specific quality of professional attention that landmark events received. The entrance to the facility was not hidden. It had been visible in the Commission's surveys for 12 years. A structural feature on the plateau's surface that was clearly an access point, but that every previous team had been unable to use because the access anomaly prevented engagement with it. It was open. Not physically open, not a gaping entrance, but open in the way that a locked door is open. When the mechanism recognizes the person approaching and disengages, the energy signature that the Commission's surveys had identified as the anomaly's active exclusion field was inactive. Mira Solis, the acquisition specialist who had gotten into 7 Tier 2 sites without triggering their access controls, looked at the entrance and said, "In 22 years of acquisition work, I have never had a site open itself for me." Kale said, "Stay alert. A site that opens itself has reasons for opening itself. Subscribe to the channel right now, because the facility is opening and what is inside is going to answer. Something the Valsari Conclave has been afraid to find out for 12 years. Like this video to help it reach more people. And share this story, because the descent into a 400-million-year-old facility deserves an audience. The interior of the facility was intact, not preserved in the way that ancient structures were preserved by geology and luck and the absence of disturbing forces. Intact in the way that active systems maintained things. Temperature regulated, atmosphere maintained at a specific composition. Lighting operational. 400 million years of continuous operation. The power source that was running the lights and the temperature regulation and the atmospheric system and the access controls had been running without interruption since the precursors had left. Dr. Chun spent the first 20 minutes inside making instrument readings and not speaking, which the team had learned to recognize as her processing mode for data that was exceeding her immediate analytical capacity. At the end of 20 minutes, she said, "The power source is drawing from the quantum vacuum. 0-point energy extraction at an efficiency level that our best theoretical models say is impossible by a factor of approximately 3. She said, "The impossible is apparently running fine, has been for 400 million years." Rio Vasil was at the walls, reading them. Not metaphorically, the walls of the facility's entrance corridor were covered in the same symbolic language that Sale had been studying. Dense weeded, floor to ceiling in both directions, and extending as far as the corridor's lighting allowed visibility. he said. Sail, you need to see this. She came to the wall and stood in front of it and was silent for a long time. The specific silence of a 12-year-old processing information at a depth that adults found surprising, and that Cale had stopped being surprised by 2 months ago. She said, "This is the assessment record. Everything this facility has been recording about every mind that has ever approached it. Every previous survey team, every commission, mission, every species that found this system in the past 400 million years," she said. There have been 47 species, not just the commission teams. 47 distinct species across 400 million years have found this system and approached this facility, Cale said. And, Sale said, none of them passed the assessment. The record for each approach is marked with the same symbol. I identified this symbol in my paper. It means, in the precursor language, necessary characteristics, absent the field archaeologist who was Sale's father said, quietly. What characteristics? Sale was quiet for a moment. Tense aside, I have been trying to identify the specific content of the assessment for 2 months. I know it is testing for cognitive and emotional characteristics. I know it is not testing for intelligence or technological capability, because the assessment record shows species much more technologically advanced than us failing it, she said. I think I understand now, being here, with the record in front of me at this density. I think I understand what it is testing for, she said. It is testing for the capacity to hold incompatible truths at the same time and function, to know something is dangerous and pursue it anyway, because it matters, to feel the weight of what you do not understand and keep working in the presence of that weight, she said. It is testing for the specific cognitive state that you are in when you do not know if what you are about to find is safe, and you go in anyway, not because you are not afraid, but because the not going would be a different kind of wrong. She looked at Cale. Every previous species turned back or sent instruments instead of people or approached with the kind of certainty that meant they had stopped genuinely not knowing and replaced it with a model. The precursors were testing for genuine uncertainty held with genuine courage, she said. Humans do that. It is, apparently, unusual. It likes right now if Sale's characterization of what the precursors were testing for just gave you chills. Subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss a story like this. And share this video because what's in the next chamber is what 400 million years of waiting was building toward. The inner facility was not one chamber. It was hundreds. Each one sealed until the team's approach triggered its opening. Each one a new set of readings for Dr. Chun and new symbolic records for Sale and new structural features for the field archaeologists to document, and in the 37th chamber, the team found the first artifact. Not the kind of artifact that the Assembly's commission had been carefully not touching in its restricted storage facility. Not the category of object that the safety board had classified as deeply concerning. This was different. This was the kind of object that the Commission's theoretical models had suggested might exist at Site 7. The kind whose description had driven 12 years of failed recovery attempts. The kind that Velsan had not described to Cale in detail because some information was delivered better by encounter than by description. It was a sphere, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter, floating without any visible support mechanism at approximately chest height in the exact center of the chamber, made of a material that Dr. Chun's instruments identified as partially in this dimension and partially not, which was a description that her instruments produced and that she spent 3 minutes trying to recharacterize before accepting that partial dimensional was what they meant. It was doing something, not emitting, not broadcasting, not generating any signal that the instruments could measure. It was doing something in the space between the measurable, something that the team members could feel at the level of physical experience without being able to point to a specific sensory input. Mira Solis, who had very good instincts, which was why she had gotten into 7 Tier 2 sites without triggering their controls, said, "Don't touch it yet." Cale said, "I wasn't going to." Mira said, "I know. I'm saying it for myself." Sale was at the wall again. The chamber walls were denser, with symbolic language than any they had passed through. She spent 12 minutes reading before she said, "This is an instruction record. Not a description. Not a historical account. Step-by-step instructions for something," she said. "The instructions are for the artifact, for activating it. And the instructions are not technical. They are not mechanical. They describe a cognitive and emotional state that the operator needs to be in for the activation to work. Dr. Vasile said. What state? She said. The same state the assessment was testing for. The instructions say, hold the full weight of what you do not understand. Do not reduce it to certainty you do not have. Stand in genuine not knowing, with genuine willingness to proceed. The artifact responds to that state. It will not respond to anything else. Kale looked at the sphere for a long time. Tensicide, how do you know the operator isn't supposed to be precursor? Why would precursor instructions say human-like things? Sale said. Because the precursors built this for whoever passed the assessment. They did not know who would pass it. The instructions are written for the cognitive architecture that the assessment was designed to select. We are the cognitive architecture that passed. The instructions are for us. She paused. And there is something else. The last section of the instructions. The part that describes what the artifact does when it is activated. The team was very still. Kale said. Tell us. Sales said. The precursors left. They did not die. They did not disappear. They chose to move to a different state of existence. A state that their technology had made possible and that they had determined was the next stage of their development. But before they left, they had a problem. She said, they had accumulated 400 million years of knowledge, not just technology. Understanding of the universe's deep structure, of consciousness, of the relationship between mind and physical reality. Understanding that they could not take with them in its current form because the state they were moving to was not compatible with information storage as they had known it. She said, so they built this, and they left it here, and they designed the assessment to find the minds that had the specific characteristic they trusted to use what they left, not the most powerful, not the most technologically advanced, the minds that could hold genuine uncertainty with genuine courage, because that is what you need to hold the kind of knowledge they accumulated without it breaking you or making you dangerous. She said, the sphere contains the complete knowledge archive of the Velapreth precursors. 400 million years of understanding, and it has been waiting here for the species that passed the assessment. The chamber was absolutely silent except for the soft hum of equipment and the specific sound of 6 people processing information that exceeded the categories available for processing it. 10 kill. Side. How do I activate it? Subscribe to the channel right now, because Kale is about to pick up the most important object in galactic history. Like this video to show us you're here for every moment of this. And share this right now, because 400 million years of waiting is about to end. The activation was not fast. Kale stood in front of the sphere for 40 minutes, not touching it, while Sale read the full instruction record aloud, and Kale listened with the specific quality of attention she had spent 34 years developing. Not the attention of someone preparing to perform a technical procedure. The attention of someone genuinely sitting with the full weight of holding an object whose nature she could not fully characterize, whose activation mechanism she could not fully understand, whose contents she could not fully imagine, and proceeding anyway because the no proceeding was a different kind of wrong. At the 41st minute, Kale extended her hand and touched the sphere. The response was not explosive, not dramatic in the way that 400 million years of waiting might have suggested. It was quiet, the way the most profound things tended to be quiet. And what happened was this. The sphere did not move. It did not change in any way that the instruments measured, but every person in the chamber experienced, simultaneously, the specific feeling of a door opening that you had not known was closed, not information, not data. The architecture for receiving information that they had not had before. A new kind of cognitive capacity, generated not by the sphere depositing content in their minds, but by the sphere somehow modifying the processing layer of their neuro-architecture in a way that made certain categories of understanding available that had not been available before. Dr. Chun looked at her instruments, and then looked at Kale and said, something changed in my cognitive processing, not my readings. Me. I can see the power source's mechanism now, not as data. I understand it. The understanding was not there before I touched the sphere, and it is there now. Dr. Vasile said, I can read the full symbolic language, all of it. Not just the sections that Sale decoded. All of it. In every site I've ever visited. I can read it now. Sal's father said nothing for a long time and then said, "I know why they left. I understand the state they moved to. I cannot describe it, but I understand it," Mirasalis said. "I know where 5 more sites are. Sites that are not in the Commission's catalog. I know where they are and I know what is in them," Kale said. "What just happened?" Sale said. "The archive did not give you information. It gave you the cognitive tools to find the information. The understanding is already in the universe. The precursors spent 400 million years developing the capacity to see it. The sphere gave you the capacity. The finding is still yours to do." She was 12 years old, and she said this with the certainty of someone who had just received the same gift and understood it completely and found it exactly as she had expected it to be. Kale said. "You knew," Sale said. "I suspected. The instructions described a cognitive expansion rather than an information transfer. I did not know what it would feel like," she said. "It feels like being given a sense you did not know you were missing. The universe was always this deep. Now, you can see that it like if the activation of the sphere just gave you the same feeling it gave the team. Subscribe to the channel right now, so you never miss a story like this. And share this video with everyone because the Valthari Conclave is about to find out what their relic hunters have done." The report that Kale transmitted to Ambassador Velson was sent from orbit above Site 17's planet, 6 hours after the activation, when the team had finished their initial documentation of the chamber and begun their survey of the additional chambers. The facility the report was comprehensive and precise, and contained everything that had happened from the moment of surface contact to the moment of transmission, with full instrument records and Sale's symbolic language translations and Dr. Chun's power source analysis in mind. 5 new site coordinates. The 12th call was to the Assembly's High Commissioner, who served as the chair of the coordinating body for all 47 member species. The call lasted 22 minutes, and the only part of it that Velson's records captured was the opening statement. Because after the opening statement, the conversation moved to a channel that was encrypted at a level above the standard diplomatic recording systems. The opening statement was, "The humans found Site 17. They activated the archive. I need you to understand what that means before I explain it. Because what it means is that the galactic knowledge landscape changed approximately 6 hours ago, and we need to discuss what we do with that." What the Conclave did with it was the most significant internal policy debate it had conducted in 400 years. Conducted over 11 days, while Kale and her team continued their work at Site 7, surveying the additional chambers, activating 2 more artifacts that operated on similar principles to the sphere, and recovering an entirely new category of precursor material that the Commission's previous excavations had not accessed. The policy debate was not primarily about the artifacts. It was about the humans, about 63 years of charmingly insufficient, and what that phrase looked like now. In light of a team of 7 people who had done what 47 civilizations had failed to do, because they had a 12-year-old who understood the precursor symbolic language, and a director who could stand in genuine uncertainty with genuine courage, and a physicist who understood impossible power sources, and an acquisition specialist who had gotten into 7 restricted sites. The debate was about what it meant that the galaxy's most thoroughly ignored junior member had just accessed the archive of the most advanced civilization in galactic history and received cognitive tools that the most advanced current civilizations had failed to develop in 400 million years of trying. The Conclave's policy director said. At the session that concluded the debate, the assessment was testing for something we do not have. The humans have it. That means the precursor's assessment of what was needed to hold their knowledge correctly identified a characteristic that we do not possess as the necessary characteristic, she said. The question before this body is not whether the humans should have the archive. The question is what it means that the precursors chose the humans and not us, and whether we can develop the characteristic the assessment was testing for, and how we work with the humans from a position that 63 years of policy has not prepared us for, she said. We called them charmingly insufficient. The universe called them the ones we were waiting for. I suggest we update our terminology. Subscribe to the channel right now, because the Valthari Conclave updating their terminology while Kale is still at Site 17 is exactly the moment this story has been building to. Like this video, so it reaches more people. Share this video because 63 years of being underestimated is about to produce something extraordinary. Ambassador Velson traveled to Site 17 himself, not sending a representative, not waiting for the team to return. He requisitioned a fast diplomatic vessel and made the 11-day journey and arrived while the team was still in the facility working through the additional chambers. He had never visited a precursor site before. He had reviewed hundreds of survey reports and thousands of artifact analyses, and had built his entire career partly on the Conclave's management of precursor-related policy. Standing in the entrance corridor with the symbolic language dense on every wall around him and unable to read a single character of it, he had an experience that he later described in a letter to the Conclave's policy director as the most educational humility of his professional life. Kale found him in the entrance corridor, standing very still, looking at the walls. She said, "Ambassador." He said, "Director in." "I hope my arrival is not disruptive," she said. "The facility let you in. It's expanding its access parameters," he said. "Is that good?" Say, Rio thinks it's reading the cognitive shift in everyone who has been in contact with people who accessed the archive. The expansion propagates through relationship. You have been in contact with me through communication, which the system seems to be counting, he said. The system is monitoring communication relationships. She said, "The system has been running for 400 million years and maintaining records of 47 species approaches. I think we should assume it is doing several things we have not characterized yet." He looked at the walls again. Then he said, "Can you read any of this?" She said, "Not before the activation. After." "Yes," he said. "What does it say here?" She translated the section he was looking at. It was the assessment record for the 43rd species to approach the facility, an entry that she had read 3 days ago and that had stayed with her. The record said, "Intelligence present, technological capability advanced, survival instinct dominant, necessary characteristics absent, uncertainty, tolerance, Kurgan not knowing, willingness to proceed without certainty as a prerequisite, assessment result, unnecessary characteristics in excess, necessary characteristics unavailable, facility remains sealed." Velson read the translation twice. Then he said, "Unnecessary characteristics in excess," she said. "The Valthari Conclave is the 46th entry," he said, "and the 47th is us." She said, "The 47th entry is the humans. The assessment result is different." She showed him the section, the record of the human team's approach, and the activation and the assessment result, in the precursor symbolic language that 400 million years of other species had failed to decode. The assessment result for the humans said, "Necessary characteristics present. Cognitive architecture compatible. Archive accessible. Expansion authorized." He read the translation. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Director Orin, I owe you and your species 63 years of revision." She said, "You owe us an update to the terminology," he said. "Charmingly insufficient," she said. "We prefer adequate to the task at hand." He almost smiled. It was the specific expression of a very senior diplomat encountering a situation that had definitively exceeded his professional frameworks and finding that the experience was not, in the end, as uncomfortable as he had anticipated. He said, "What does the archive do? Not, what does it contain? What does it do?" She said, "It gives you better questions, not answers. The cognitive expansion does not deposit knowledge. It modifies the architecture so you can see the questions more clearly, which is how you find the answers." Ria spent 3 days re-examining precursor site records he has been analyzing for 12 years and found 17 things he did not find before. Dr. Chun has a working theoretical model for the zero-point energy system that our physics community said was impossible. Not because the sphere gave her the model, because the sphere gave her the cognitive capacity to see the structure that was already in the physics. The model was always there. "She can see it now," she said. Cell's father understands the precursor's departure, not as a historical fact, as a choice he could imagine making. This fear did not explain it to him. It gave him the capacity to understand it from the inside, which is different from being told it. She said, "The archive is not a library. It is a cognitive upgrade, and the precursors built it for whoever passed their test, which means they expected whoever passed the test to use it in their own way, for their own development, in directions the precursors could not predict," she said. They trusted whoever came with enough uncertainty tolerance to use the tools in the right spirit. That's what the test was for. Not to find the cleverest species, to find the ones who would hold the gift correctly. The distinction between a library and a cognitive upgrade just changed how you think about what the precursors left behind. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with everyone you know, and stay with us, because the Conclave's response to what they have just learned is the last thing standing between this story and its ending. The formal session of the Galactic Assembly that addressed the Site-17 activation and its implications was convened 3 months after Kale's team returned from the facility with the full documentation of their work, the complete translation of the facility's symbolic records, and the activation reports for all 3 artifacts that had been successfully engaged. The session was attended by every assembly member and several non-member civilizations that had been invited as observers. Given the universal significance of what was being discussed, the Conclave's ambassador opened the session. Not Belsa. He had requested that the opening be made by someone who had not spent the past years using the word insufficient about humanity, and the Conclave had sent a young junior diplomat named Velprol, who had been selected precisely because she had entered the diplomatic corps after the Site-17 events, and carried none of the prior framing. She said, "The Velpreth precursors spent 400 million years building an assessment system for the species that would come after them. They built it to identify a specific cognitive characteristic that they believed was necessary for the kind of development they had achieved. They built a repository that would be accessible only to species that possessed that characteristic," she said. Of the 47 species to encounter the repository in 400 million years, 1 passed the assessment. The humans, not because they are the most intelligent, not because they are the most technologically advanced, not because they are the oldest or the largest or the most powerful, she said, because they are the most willing to stand in genuine uncertainty and proceed with genuine courage, because they do not replace not knowing with a model and call it certainty. Because they're 12-year-old scientists, papers that overthrow the consensus because the consensus does not match what they actually see, said. This is not a comfortable thing for civilizations that have spent millennia developing confidence in their capabilities and frameworks, including mine. She said, "The question before this assembly is not what to do with the archive, because the archive has already been activated and its gifts have already been given and cannot be. Ungiven, the question is what to do with the understanding that the precursor's 400 million year assessment produced, which is an understanding about what kind of mind is most capable of growing toward the kind of knowledge the precursors achieved," she said. "The precursors did not test for intelligence. They tested for what you bring to the edge of what intelligence cannot yet reach. The uncertainty, the courage, the willingness to be wrong in the presence of the important, rather than right in the presence of the manageable," she said. "We have 63 years of documentation of exactly that characteristic in the species we called charmingly insufficient. Every single thing we filed under that heading is a data point for the precursor assessment. Every improbable alliance, every reckless and defective acquisition, every 12-year-old who corrects the consensus, because the consensus is not what she sees," she said. "I propose that this assembly formally revise 63 years of classification, and I propose that we ask the humans, specifically, to lead the continued work at Site-17 and at the 5 additional sites now identified, because the facility is theirs by the only designation that matters, which is the one the precursors chose. Subscribe to the channel right now because Velprol just gave the speech that 63 years of policy needed to end with. Like this video to tell us you have been here for every moment, from the opening word to this. And share this because this story is not over until the guild gets its due." The assembly voted the formal reclassification passed without opposition, which was the first time in assembly history that a reclassification had passed without opposition. And the significance of that was noted in the session record by a clerk who had been present for 214 previous contentious votes. The Relic Hunters Guild was formally recognized as the lead organization for precursor site work, with full assembly standing under a mandate that the Guild's founding documents had never anticipated and that Kale reviewed with the specific expression of someone who had spent 34 years being classified as an acquisition specialist and was now being asked to lead the most significant archaeological program in galactic history. She reviewed it for 20 minutes. Then she said yes and went back to work, which was what she would have done regardless of the formal standing. The 5 new sites that Mira Solis had identified in the moment of the archive's activation were surveyed within the year. 2 of them contained active facilities similar to Site 17. One contained something that Dr. Chun spent 6 months characterizing before publishing a paper that added 4 new theorems to galactic physics. The 4th was a different kind of site entirely. Not a repository, but a record. The complete history of the precursor's 400 million year civilization, in symbolic language that Sale could now read fluently, that Rio and Kale and the field archaeologists could read, and that the precursor language scholars at 12 assembly universities were now learning from the materials the Guild shared openly. The 5th site was the one that took the longest to understand. It did not contain artifacts. It did not contain records. It contained instructions. A detailed, step-by-step guide for developing the specific cognitive characteristic that the precursors had spent 400 million years identifying as the most important one. Not a recipe. A curriculum. A program for developing uncertainty tolerance, encouraging not knowing, and species that had the potential for it but had let technological confidence calcify the capacity before it fully developed. The curriculum was designed for any species that encountered it. Not just humans, though humans who reviewed it said that large parts of it described practices that human cultures had developed independently, which was why the characteristic was more developed in humans than in species that had spent their formative period building systems designed to eliminate uncertainty rather than tolerate it. The conclave spent a year reading the curriculum before the High Director acknowledged, in a public statement that was very carefully worded but was unambiguous in its core meaning, that the conclave's 3,000-year tradition of comprehensive modeling, of building the largest and most complete frameworks for understanding the universe and then operating from within those frameworks with high confidence, had systematically developed the exact opposite of what the precursor curriculum was building toward. He said, "We built certainty when we needed uncertainty. We built confidence when we needed courage and not knowing. We built the frameworks that answered questions when we should have been, developing the tolerance for the questions that frameworks cannot answer," he said. The human's culture, by accident or by the specific pressure of their developmental history, built the other thing. The thing we did not build, the thing the precursors spent 400 million years identifying as the necessary thing. He said, "We will not become humans. That is not possible and not the point. The curriculum is not a prescription for becoming human. It is a prescription for developing a capacity that each species must develop in its own form. The question for the conclave is what our form of this capacity looks like." He said, "I do not know yet. Answering that question is what the curriculum is for, and I am told it takes time, and I am prepared to take the time, because the alternative is another 400 million years of being outside the facility while the universe waits for us to develop what is required." Kale Oren, reading the High Director's statement at the Guild's headquarters station, felt something that she did not have a precise word for. Not triumph. Not vindication. Something quieter and more structural than either. She felt the specific satisfaction of someone who had spent 34 years working at the edge of what was known without certainty about what was there, and had discovered that the edge itself was the place that mattered, and that the not knowing was the thing the universe was built to reward. She sent a message to Sale, who was back at her own desk, working on the full translation of the history record from Site 4, because 12-year-olds who had been given a cognitive upgrade by a precursor archive still did their homework and still went to school on Tuesdays. The message said, "The conclave updated their terminology, and the assembly gave us the lead. Nice work." Sale's response came back in 4 minutes. It said, "I was just thinking about what the next site might have. Do you think there are more than 5? Kael smiled. She wrote back, "I think there are as many as there are questions we haven't asked yet. Start with the ones you can see from where you are and work outward from there." That was how it was done. That was how it had always been done. Not from certainty. Not from a comprehensive model developed in advance. From the specific place where knowledge ended and the genuine unknown began. With the tools you had and the people beside you and the willingness to proceed, that was either the most dangerous or the most necessary quality in the universe, depending on whether you were the kind of mind that the precursors had been looking for. Hit like if this story has given you something that is going to stay with you. Subscribe to the channel right now, because we have more stories like this coming. And share this video with every person in your world, because the Relic Hunters earned this ending.